pornography has had a huge and dangerous influence on our culture, on our society, and really on the world when you think about it. And it's only gotten worse within the past 10, 20 years in the internet. And we're going to be talking about that today with Barb Winters, an author and a speaker, and with her testimony, with how she's dealt with this in her own family, with her children. And I really encourage you to check this episode out. It's going to be very interesting and very important for all of us, whether we have kids or not, to really look at this. So check out the show notes. There are links for her website and also for a free book. There's a link to download a free book called The Truth Makes Us Free. And it's a great value. And also like, share, and subscribe if you would. And on to the episode. Well, welcome back to Kingdom Over Coffee. This is Britt Mooney, and I have another special guest with us. This is going to be an amazing conversation, and Barb Winters is someone that I met at the Florida Christian Writing Conference. I think that was the first time we met in person.
Yes, it was. Mm-hmm.
And we met, and we were having conversations about different things and podcasting, and I just said, man, I got to have you on the show sometime. So here we finally are. It's been a couple months and we're finally doing it, but I think this is going to be a great conversation. So first, how are you doing, Barb?
I'm really well. How are you?
I'm doing well. How's your New Year been so far?
My New Year is awesome. I live in Florida though, so I've got sunshine on a daily basis.
You sing little sunshine songs. You have little, yeah, you have little songs you sing. That's awesome. We're in Florida. How close are you to where we have the conference?
About 40 minutes, Central Florida. Sure.
Wow.
Yeah, I commuted. It was really nice.
That is nice. That's awesome. So, Barb, why don't you just introduce yourself, and you can tell a little bit of your story, just who you are, and any part of your story you want to tell as we start.
Okay.
Here.
Love to. I am a pastor's wife, and I am the mom of 4 grown children now. I recently retired from a homeschool career. Our youngest graduated in the spring. And about 6 years ago, we brought our youngest 2 children down to Florida to plant a church. And in the middle of our church planting, right after we moved here, we found out that our son, who was 14 at the time, had been watching pornography. And that was really the first time I was kind of exposed to this world of what was going on online. So he was scared into telling us, and he had been watching a pornographic video when a bogus warning popped up on his screen saying that they were going to call the police if he didn't pay them money. Thankfully, he knew well to come to us rather than try and pay the money. But up until that point, I really had no idea. This wasn't something that was even on my radar. We hadn't really discussed it very often. I hadn't thought about it. I knew it existed, but I hadn't given much of a thought. We were Christians. We homeschooled. We taught our children biblical principles. I knew they knew right from wrong, and I trusted them. So it just hadn't been something that I thought they would ever even think about. But there was a lot of things that I didn't know. I didn't know that it was so readily available as it is. And I didn't know that my child's brain wasn't developed. And I didn't know that he had a natural curiosity for it. So I thought, not my kid, but I was completely wrong. So when I found out all this information, I was completely devastated. And as most moms can probably relate, when you find out traumatic things about your children, I just really had all the feels. And even when he first told me, I had this gag reflex in the back of my throat. I thought I was going to throw up. But I felt guilty, and I felt ashamed, and I felt angry, and I felt sad. But mostly I felt alone. It's not like I could turn to my best friend over coffee and say, hey, my kid's watching porn. How about yours? We just don't talk about it. So We did a lot of things when we first found out, but later, about a year and a half later, when he was 16, he confessed to us that he was still watching pornography. As a matter of fact, he was addicted. And so at that point, we really buckled down. We did a lot of things to help him because he wanted out. And through that process, through my research and through trying to figure out how to help him, I realized how many children this is really affecting, how many children stumble across it, even accidentally, or just look for it innocently because they're curious. And when I figured that out, I was like, wait a minute, if all these children are looking at porn, then that many more parents have children who look at porn. And why aren't we talking about it? And so I decided I was going to be that mom who started using these unnatural words and start talking about this pervasive thing that's going on behind our closed doors even. And so I hung my hat up. I started a website called hopefulmom.net, and I've been encouraging and supporting parents for the past couple of years in this pornographic world. So that's the beginning of my story, Britt.
That's the beginning. Wow.
Yeah.
Your beginning isn't like, grew up in a small town or anything. That's your beginning.
There's all that stuff too, but
So a couple questions.
Sure.
As you started to deal with this, I'm just kind of delve into your story just a little bit here. What was your husband's reaction? So, you talk about your reaction. I mean, your husband as a guy, how did he react to this?
Well, his first response was a little less explosive than mine. His first response was, what's the big deal? This is natural. This is normal for boys. So he didn't, he, like me, though, didn't really understand what pornography looks like today. Because, it's natural that boys are curious and girls are too. But of course, we stigmatize it into the boy world. Right. But he was a lot calmer than I was. He was a lot calmer. I was smashing things. He was like telling me to get over it. And
I think that you're right, that, we come from this culture, even in the church, right? We come from this culture sometimes of, that's natural, or even like when you get into dating and like, some of this toxic stuff, it's the girl's job to say no and all of this stuff. I mean, like there's all this toxic stuff that's not kingdom, that's not heaven, that's not God's design.
Correct.
But we don't know any better, and we just kind of adopt it, and we don't and we don't talk about it, we don't expose it, and we don't expose it in a loving way. And that's the other problem. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to get on my soapbox yet. I'm going to let you talk. But
let me get on my soapbox.
Well, sure. But I think that I'm just thinking of when I was in college, I don't know, early 20s.
Sure.
And Friends was on. And I think Friends was the first show that I saw they normalized pornography.
Yeah.
Now, I could be wrong, but that's the first show I remember where they would talk about it like it was funny. They would talk about like it was normal. This is just this is what you do. And maybe you hide it, but maybe you don't. But this is just normal. And they made it funny. And at the time I laughed, right? Mm-hmm. And so here's some of my story, with that. And this is why I think it's important to talk about, because I come from a family where the men have cheated on their wives. Yeah. And it's happened more than once in different situations. And when God called me to be a teacher, and God called me, and then when I got married, it was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to break the cycle. I'm not going to be that guy. Right.
Right.
And, when Beck and I were first married, whatever you want to call it, I was delving into some pornography. Right. Mm-hmm. I remember exactly where I was. I remember I was standing on the front stoop of the apartment where we were living at the time. I don't know how audible the voice was. Some people say it's audible. It feels audible, right? When God speaks to you really directly. And he said, if you don't stop this, you will cheat on your wife.
Oh, wow.
He said, this is the beginning. This is it. This is where it starts.
Mm-hmm.
And it really it broke me, because I was like, well, I don't want to do that. Like, that's awful, but not realizing that, that's a lot of times the devil doesn't start with cheat on your wife, right? The devil doesn't start with that. He starts with, oh, this is no big deal. It's funny. The guys and friends thought it was funny, and you made jokes about it, and not realizing the mindset and the sort of damage that it can do.
Yeah.
I think my first question is, talk about some of what you found, as you've talked about this topic and with other moms. Why is porn so damaging? I mean, I could talk about it, but what are some reasons why, physically, spiritually, whatever, that porn is so damaging?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is that God created us to connect and bond with someone.
Amen.
And when people are watching pornography, what they don't understand is there's some chemical and hormonal reactions going on in the brain. And we are building bonds with images on the screen. And so you're finding, especially with today's pornography, and I'll describe that in a minute, you become so bonded to what's going on the screen that you need more and more of that, and it escalates. And they're finding that men are having a hard time having sexual relations with women, real life women. So they've got the erectile dysfunction going on, et cetera. So, I mean, you've got, that's spiritual, that's physical. And you also, is highly, highly addictive.
Yep.
It really messes with the brain. There's proof through SPECT, I think is what they're called, images that show that it's as addictive as like heroin.
Yep.
So we think it's innocent that somebody just stumbles across it and watches one video, but it's like the alcoholic who took their first drink. You don't know whether you're going to be the one who's addicted to it or not. So we want to try and prevent that from happening. But as far as the type of pornography that we're talking about, I mean, when we were watching Friends in the 1990s, they weren't referring to what we're referring to today. It's much more violent. It's much more aggressive. They treat women like commodities. It's really horrible.
Yeah, well, it's gotten a lot darker, and it goes back to what you were saying before. It's that, the rule of, law of diminishing returns or whatever.
Yes.
It's and I remember in Ted Bundy and his story of, it started with just regular porn and just got so sick. But that's part of the lie, is that, you said you don't know who's going to take the drink and who's going to get addicted. And there's some truth to that, but I'm just going to say, I don't know of any guy who has dealt with pornography that he's just been able to say no and just stop. Like when you really talk to guys, like I do sometimes, and it's like, no, I really had to make decisions. I had to make habit changes. I had to, like, something had to happen for more than just, well, I just won't do that anymore. Like it is so addictive, and there's such a lie in it. That, I love what you said about connection, and you're finding that more and more in even secular, arenas where they're talking about porn and what's happening. People are starting to realize more and more that, oh, it really is damaging. It's damaging to our brains. Like, boys more and more they're having trouble engaging in society. They're having more and more trouble being self-motivated to achieve and do things in life and go to college. And like just
Right.
normal stuff that I thought was normal, right? And but we have so many boys, and this is something that we as pastors in my pastors group we talk about, because we literally have a friend who's a counselor, and he deals with this, and we talk to our sons, and we talk to each other about, like, we start to hear about stories, and it's like, and the first question we ask, especially with young men, is, are they looking at porn? And if you don't know, ask them, because it's one of those things that's so prevalent. Like you're saying, it's so much out there. And because it is so prevalent, that I think part of it is it's gotten so much more, all that you said, aggressive and violent and just weird and dark, that a lot of that is because they're trying to compete with each other, right? I mean, it's so prevalent. Like, how do you stick out? Like, how do you, you see what I'm saying? Like, how do you, but because it's all based in a lie, it just gets more twisted, and it just gets more. And anyway, so that's what it is with just regular people, like you're saying, like regular men and women too, right?
Women. Yes, we can't discount the women.
It gives us, and I think for men, it also gives us a very skewed view of what a real life relationship should look like.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not realistic. That's like right. Watching, Rambo and thinking, well, that's real war. Like, like it's so skewed.
Right. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because in this classroom, because I go into classrooms, I teach 8th, 9th graders how to avoid risky behaviors. And what we know is that they are going to pornography for their sex ed. So they don't ask their parents anything about it. Why ask parents when you have Google? So they go to it, and what they don't understand is what you're saying, is that is unrealistic. And because they're not old enough to distinguish and understand that yet, they think that's normal. And that is why we're also seeing more child-on-child sexual molestation, because they don't understand that what they're observing and watching is made up stuff, and they're acting it out.
Well, that was leading me to the next question. So, we talked a little bit more on adults and in general, but what are some of the things that you're seeing with kids? What are some of the things that you're seeing with kids as far as how this is affecting kids? I mean, obviously you had, your son who dealt with addiction, but as you deal with it more and have more conversations, what else do you see?
Yeah, we're seeing, like we were talking before we hit record, is that it's being normalized. So everybody thinks that it's no big deal. When I walk into the classroom and I say the average age of exposure to pornography is 11, typically 2 or 3 people mumble under their breath, "Oh yeah, I was 11, or I was 9, or I was 7. I mean, it's crazy that they've all been exposed, and not all, I'm exaggerating a little, but most of them have been exposed either by stumbling onto it accidentally, or just out of plain curiosity and doing a Google search. So that's that. And they talk about it, and they send and receive nudes on a regular basis. So instead of, hey, how we used to pass notes? Now they text, but instead of saying, do you want to go out with me? They say, can you send me a nude? And they do. They send the nudes back and forth. We need to actually tell them, hey, do you guys realize that's child pornography? And they're shocked. They don't put that together at all. So, they just think it's no big deal. And so we as parents and leaders and trusted adults need to come in and let them know this isn't normal. This isn't how God created us, and this isn't how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, it's something I talk about with my kids, especially my 2 youngest, but with all 3 of my kids, and I talk with them about how over-sexualized our children have become.
Yes.
And I mean that in every way. It's like, why do we talk about kids having to date in middle school? Or, I mean, there's just some of this stuff that's just so, it's skewed. And I wanted to mention one other thing that I think is very damaging in general about pornography is it dehumanizes people.
Mm.
It actually dehumanizes the dignity of the God image in us. It's not even about Christians. Like, it's not even like, even if you didn't believe in God, like there's
Right.
all this evidence that it just dehumanizes people. And like you're saying, it keeps them from, I think that's one of the reasons it keeps them from engaging with real people, because it dehumanizes our idea of who people are. And it has those effects. So what was some of the kind of outcomes? You kind of talked about your story with your son. Like, what were some of the things that you guys felt that you did that worked, that were kind of seemed to help the situation?
Well, there's a lot of different things that had to happen in our household and that I recommend to other parents. And the first, of course, is to have filters. And they're so controversial, and I don't really understand why. I mean, I think every person needs accountability. We are in the day and age, well, whatever. I think God just created us like that we need each other. We need fellowship. We need accountability. We need to have each other. And part of that accountability is having filters on our Wi-Fi, and we have filters on each device, just so our kids know, hey, we're here to protect you. We're doing that by making sure you don't accidentally stumble across these things. We followed the lead. I mean, we did a few things up front, but then when our son came back to us and he really wanted freedom from this thing that had a grip on him, we asked him, well, what do you think we should do? And I highly recommend that we talk to our kids. These conversations are so important. And he told us a few things that we did. He told us that he had been watching it in the middle of the night. And so we had originally put his phone in the kitchen, but he said, well, I just go out to the kitchen and pick it up. So he asked us if we could put it in our master bath. And so, I mean, one of the things I always caution with the kids when I'm in the school anyway is how it affects our health to have our phones next to us all night long anyway. We really need a good night's sleep. And that was not happening in our household. Not only was my son getting up and watching pornography, but my husband also was having a hard time sleeping, and he was spending hours up in the middle of the night. And so we all sat down as a family and decided that we were going to start getting full night's sleep. We put all the devices in the master bath. We got blackout curtains. My son wears earplugs to bed. It was just so important for people to go to bed, stay in bed, get a good night's sleep, and get some good solid rest. And I mean, I'm all about the sleep anyway. But, that was just a few of the things that we did. Yeah. For him, for a while, we needed to keep him busy. And oddly enough, a trigger is boredom. And when he told me that, I flat out didn't believe him. I thought that was a cop-out. But I started doing some research and found out that boredom really is a trigger. And so for a while, we made sure that every minute of his day was full. Now, at some point, I think that all of us need to learn to be still with our thoughts. And so that's a learned behavior, especially in this day and age where you can be on your phone 24 hours a day. It's crazy, but it's a learned behavior. We need to be still and learn to read God's word or pray or however we can deal with our own thoughts. And really, that's what it's all about, right? We have to be able to deal with what's going on in our own thoughts. So those were a couple of things that we put into play. One of the things I always caution with parents is that there's no quick fix. There really isn't. It's a long endeavor, and we need to be patient and be willing to walk by their side. And because he was ready to change, that made a huge difference. Yeah. It's got to be intrinsically motivated. I mean, we do need to protect our kids. We have a job, but when they start hitting 14, 15, 16, if they don't want to change, there's not a lot we can do. I mean, they have to want it. So, helping them see the dangers, helping them see what the problems are, helping them understand so that they can decide. And some of that was, I mean, he was a believer. I mean, he is a believer, and he, got right with God, and he on a regular basis would read the Bible. He still does. He's like my hero because he exudes that sort of behavior that I want to have in my life even. So he knew that he just needed to turn it around, and he made that decision, but as a mom, I still needed that support. And so, it's helpful when we have other people we can encourage and talk to and understand and go to.
No, I totally agree with that. Like I said in the email, it's one of the things that we say, and the founder of our church network, he says it, and I repeat it, is that secrets have power in darkness, and it's the enemy that wants us to not tell anybody. Now, I'm not saying you got to put it on Facebook for everybody, but you do have to have a community of people that is safe enough that you can tell them things, and that you can be honest and vulnerable. When you started as a pastor's wife, when you started talking to people and being brave and just kind of putting stuff out there, what kind of responses did you get? Did you get a lot of Me Too stuff, or did you get like resistance? Like, what sort of responses did you get?
Great question. So when I first started writing about it, I used a pen name because our son was still underage, and I didn't want to, didn't want him to have that stigma. But I did start talking about it in general. So I didn't tell our story, but I started speaking up more during Human Trafficking Awareness Month, or talking about the risky behaviors and how one of those behaviors is that our children stumble across pornography. I actually received good, warm welcomes when I finally disclosed that it was my son. And when I started talking about our story with his permission, the friends I got so many messages either through email or on Facebook or wherever, just saying, it's great. Here's my story. Here's what happened to me. Here's what happened to our son. Here's what happened to our daughter. It was, a lot of people confessing that they have been in the same boat, and even applauding the fact that I was willing to say out loud that this is our story. So it was received very well.
That's great. Because as we start to share, I think a lot of pastors, and I'm a pastor, and you and your husband are pastors. I think part of the lie, and maybe in some situations it's true, but part of the lie is that, well, if I share something that's going on with my family like that, then they'll see me as less spiritual, or they'll see me as less of a leader. But I have found that almost all the time that people actually see you as more of a leader. The fact that you're willing to go, hey, I got stuff too, I'm not speaking truth from like this perfect place. Like, you have to be this perfect professional Christian, and it really can bring a community together when people are able to be vulnerable. I mean, it's right there in James, right? Confess your faults to one another. Yes, to God, but to one another, and you will be healed. Like, expose this stuff.
Right.
And we should be a community of people who love one another, who realize God had to forgive the unforgivable in me, no matter what I've done. He had to forgive great things for me, and we're supposed to forgive, and love one another in that. And there can be a lot of great healing in that, I think. And that's kind of how it's designed, I believe. And so I think a lot of times it's the lie of the enemy to keep us, well, we don't really want to talk about it, and to really expose with our children and treat them like if you're old enough to be able to find it, you're old enough to have the conversation, at least.
Absolutely.
This is what it is. And don't fall into what our culture says is normal,
Right. Well, and we want to be the experts. I mean, the parents that I've talked to that have young children and they ask, well, when should I bring this up? If I say, early before you hand them a device, and you know how young they're getting devices handed to them, they're like, oh, well, I don't want to open that door because then they'll go looking for it. I'm like, no, we need to be the first ones to say the word. We need to be the first ones to bring it up, because then we look like the experts to them, and they will know that when there's a problem, they can come directly to us. And so, yeah, we need to talk about it. It's crazy. I love too how you brought up the light and the darkness, because one of the things I actually said to my son the second time he came to us and he confessed, it was one of those, it was like a late night thing. And he came, he knocked on our door. I have something to tell you. And I was like, oh, great. And, he sat on the edge of our bed and started telling us how he was still doing all this. I said to him, we need to expose this to the light. This can't be in the dark any longer. And the reason I said it to him at that time was because I was asking him a lot of questions, trying to figure out, how did this first start? And when did this, what are triggers and all that? Because the first time he kind of lied. And so, when I start asking and diving into some of this and him hawed, I was like, look, we need to expose this to the light, because we don't want to give the darkness power. And so I love how you said that too. That's exactly what we went for. And once he started, opening up to us about the origin of it all, et cetera, then he could get on with the healing. And we then started telling, a few people. I told his sister who lived in our house, who we've been keeping it secret from her. And we told a few family members that he was around on a regular basis, because we just needed people to understand what was happening. It was still a year or two before I exposed it to our church, but we were allowing God to do his work and healing him and healing our family and allowing us to be who we needed to be to get past it.
Yeah. And so, and as we're talking, some of the things that I like to say to people with this is, God did create sex, and God did create it, and he created it to be good. Yes. But just like anything that he created to be good and wonderful, and to our discussion, for two people to become one, right? And to your point earlier, it damages the ability to do that, right. Because porn isn't about another person. It's really only about me. Yes. And it dehumanizes other people. That damages the God design. And just to say, like, if you can abuse it, that means it has a good purpose to begin with. Yes. That's what I tell people. If you can abuse it, just because there's abuse doesn't mean whatever the thing is in and of itself is bad. It just means that. So a lot of times for me, part of it is saying, look, there is a healthy, joyous way to do this. And God showed me this just a couple of weeks ago about how the devil's first question was, would God put you in this place and not let you eat of any of these trees? The first question was not about the one tree. The first question was, man, God's not going to let you do all this. Mm-hmm. And she went, no. It's just this one tree. And now he's engaging her. But the first was an accusation against God that here you have desires and he's not letting you use them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lot of times when we talk about some of the issues in our culture around sex, I think a lot of times people are like, well, you just, we're not prudes. At least, God's not a prude. You can't read Song of Solomon and think God's a prude. He's not a prude, but it's like, this is how it's meant to be. This is how he designed it. And when we go outside of the design, damaging things happen. And really bad things happen. So, and I feel the same way about church or preaching. Like, Are some preachers saying bad stuff? Yeah, but does that mean preaching is bad, right? I mean, see what I mean? Like
Yes, absolutely.
you can twist anything, you can pervert
Right.
anything, and so I think for me, one of the things that has helped me is my mentor was not only open about his own struggle, and he would be accountable to me. And we kind of learned to do that with each other about porn and what we're,
Hmm.
but he was also accountable and honest about, the good things about his relationship with his wife, right? It was like,
Awesome.
like, and it wasn't around everybody, but like when we were
Right.
alone, it's like, and he would do, and I never had that with an older man in my life. The fact that I was in my 20s until I had an older man go, man, I've been married for 25 years, and it's still great, it's still awesome, it just gets better, and you know what I mean. And
Yes.
but for me, who had been raised in a culture that said, oh, well, when you get older, you just, it's just rote and it's just
Tolerate
not
it.
fun, right? But now I had a different example, like, oh no, it doesn't have to be like that,
Right.
like. And so to me, I think that's part of it as well, is not just telling people how damaging porn can be and the twisted nature of it is, but also to say, man, it was meant to be so beautiful. It was
True.
created to be so beautiful. And don't let somebody ruin that for you. Don't let somebody
Yeah.
ruin that. So at least that's been my experience. That really helped me, I think, as a young man,
Yeah,
think,
that's
oh,
great.
I don't have to go into this lie that, well, after a couple of years, it won't be exciting anymore or whatever. Like
Right.
that's part of the lie, I think,
We actually in the classroom tell kids that married men say that their sex life is better than single men or men who cohabitate, which is just living with a woman.
Right.
And like, their eyes are like really wide open, like, really? And then we tell them, look, we want you to enjoy sex someday when the time is right.
Right. Right.
Because, yeah, I mean, we can't talk about God in the classroom, but that's the whole point is like, look, God created this to be something fantastic. And one of the reasons our son came to us is because someone in their youth group talked about how their parents' marriage had broken up because the husband was addicted to pornography.
Mm.
And my son was like, wait a minute, I don't want that. I want to get married someday, and I don't want this to ruin my marriage.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, and because, again, this is why, as you talked about earlier, porn is so damaging, because sex was not meant to be apart from relationship
Right.
and connection. And so and that's why it can get more exciting, right? I mean, that's because as you grow together and you're more connected, as ushy-gushy as that might feel to men, like it's still true. Like that's part of why, that's part of why it still remains a beautiful, cool thing as you get older. And because our culture is so, again, it's in my opinion, it's the influence of porn to think, oh, well, old people having sex, that's gross, right? I mean, like, it's like, I still think that's the porn influence, right?
Yeah,
That
you're right.
you got to be good looking, and you got to be
right.
a stripper kind of thing, or whatever. It's like, no, man. It's so much different than that.
Right. Well, and it's pervasive now too in the colleges with the hookup culture. It's like,
right.
We don't need to actually connect emotionally. We're just going to connect for one night, and it's just going to be a physical act, and then we're going to go on our merry way. What? Why? Why would you want that? Because it can be so much better. Yeah.
Well, and I think part of it is that we're dealing with a culture that and people in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
Porn is a symptom of something. It's not the thing. And the hookup culture is a symptom of something. It's a symptom of a fatherless generation. It's a symptom of, and I don't mean just absent men from the home. I mean the orphan sort of spirit that permeates our culture, where we feel God has left us alone, and God is absent. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, we look for relief. And some people look for it in sex, other people in drugs, some people in achievement, some people in career, some people in, like, however we seek to, get that relief.
Right.
At the core, there's something that we really desire.
Right, those longings, those needs
those longings.
God actually put there for us because He wants us to come to Him.
Exactly, and so those are the kind of things, man. I remember, years ago, because I would bring some of this stuff up, and I'd talk about sex with some other married guys, and like the light bulbs would come on, like, oh, you mean it doesn't have to be because they had been influenced by porn? It's like, oh. Like it, doesn't have to be this like show every time, like it was just so weird. But like you said, now it's so bad that it's starting as kids, that's normal, that this is this unrealistic view that won't fulfill them, that won't bless them and won't bless other people. It'll just lead to bondage. So what are some, like, as you've been talking with people, what are some stories of maybe redemption? Like, as you've been talking with other moms, I know we talked about your son, but are there any other sort of stories of redemption where you've seen in families where this has really gotten better?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is I did like an online conference sort of thing. And we had, several people attend, and I was talking about how I had trouble how to view my son, because when you find out that this is going on, like I grew up in the day and age where this was like a thing that shady characters did. Right. And so I had a hard time viewing him. I kind of was thinking, is he a monster? Because that's what I think of when I think of people who watch this on a regular basis. But then my view changed, and I began to think of him more as a victim, because he's a victim of society. He's a victim of, he asked somebody if they would show it to him, and that person should have said no, and they said yes. So when I switched to kind of that sort of view, but then my husband actually helped me see that he's actually a potential victor. And so I was talking about this in this conference, explaining how my view had changed from monster to victim to potential victor. And actually he is walking in victory. So it's amazing. And I got a personal message from a gal just saying, I'm just in tears right now because you have really helped me see my child differently. And so that is, that's a win. That's a positive. That's for me why I talk, because I want people to know, look, you're not alone, and your child's story is not over, and neither is yours. And there is hope, because this isn't the end. This isn't the end. So that's, yeah. It's fun to hear from parents. I recently got an email even where somebody sent me a long message about what was going on, just angry up and down. And I saw myself in every sentence of that email. And I, sent her something back saying, I totally understand. You're perfect. Those are all perfectly normal and natural responses. And then I just, was trying to walk her through some of the things and just trying to give her a little bit of hope and encouragement and let her know, like I said earlier, this isn't going to be easy. It's not going to be a one-time fix. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand. But there is hope. And she sent just another email back saying, I am so glad that you sent that to me. I feel so much better. Just to be able to even speak about it with somebody is such a relief. So,
yeah. And we could probably do a whole other episode on the connection to sex trafficking and the connection to, so many other problems. Well, at least the sex trafficking issue. And I know that's part of your heart too. So talk about that. When is that month?
January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So we're just coming out of that. Sure. And what I think people don't understand, that pornography fuels sex trafficking, and human trafficking fuels pornography. And I like to make that link because people need to be aware that when you click on a video and you are watching what you think is an innocent video, it's not. A lot of times, more often than not, the people in that video are being trafficked. They're being coerced. They're being forced. They were bribed through sextortion. There's all kinds of things going on. They were groomed, and now their trafficker has them in a place where they feel hopeless and helpless, and they don't believe that they can walk away. And we're fueling that, when we're the ones clicking on the video. And so I like to make that link, because even if nothing else makes a person say no, that information might do it. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Brad.
No, and I'm bringing it up because we had somebody in our church network, a young woman who she had a very, very disturbing story where she went through a lot of that.
Yeah.
And, now a believer, and she got out of it, and praise God. But, and I've shared, I know it's uncomfortable, but I shared it on Facebook, not her specific story, but a story that she shared that, she said was like hers. And, I think it was a couple of years ago. I'm trying to remember. It was around the same time that Pornhub got in a lot of trouble because they were like, they didn't even know which ones were by consent or which ones were human trafficking.
No, they don't. They don't care.
They don't know, or they don't care. Well, until some of these women's groups who were like, wait a minute, you should know. Like, isn't that important? And I know that's, we shouldn't be there at all. I get it. But there is enough of that connection that I think it's a very valid point. Like, you don't know, because that is a human being. That's
right.
That's somebody's sister. That's somebody's daughter. That's somebody's, and like you're saying, that maybe not the only reason, maybe not the first reason you shouldn't do it, but maybe that could help people realize how much of a victim thing there's going on.
Yeah.
And it is connected to human trafficking and sex trafficking. And I know that from, like I said, a personal connection, and it was in the news there for a while until it kind of wasn't. So where can people find you? So, I know you talked about your website. What was the name of that again?
The website is at hopefulmom.net.
Hopefulmom.net.
Yes, hopefulmom.net. So yeah, connect with me there. That's the best place to connect. And when you go to hopefulmom.net, if you subscribe for updates, you'll get updates regarding blog posts, and you'll get updates regarding my upcoming book, and you'll get a free PDF download, 7 steps after your child sees porn. So you can connect with me there, or on Facebook at Difficult Conversations for Parents, and Instagram at difficult.conversations.
Nice. Okay. Well, we're going to put that stuff in the show notes. So if you guys are interested, check that out. And do you know when the book is coming out? I remember you signed the contract. Do you know when?
The book right now is slated to be released summer of 2023. So if
there you go.
About the publishing industry, it takes a long time.
Yep,
but I'm really excited about it, though. So the working title is Healthy Relationships in a Hookup World. It's
a great title. It's a good title. No pun intended. It's a good hook. So this has been great, Barb. And I so appreciated meeting you, and I appreciate your willingness to talk about something difficult, but you had a story where you had to be, willing to talk about something uncomfortable in our culture, and in a way that's, I just appreciate the way you used it as an opportunity, and just how you let God lead you through it. And I know that, I know a lot of people have been blessed already, and I just hope more people were blessed as we talked about it today. Blessed in the sense of that there's hope, that yes, it's a big problem, but God's bigger, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right. So if you would just pray us out, and just bless the people who have been listening.
Absolutely. Father, you're a good, good Father. And we are so grateful to have you in our lives. We're so grateful for your Son and what you've done for us. Father, I thank you for this podcast and this opportunity to shed light on who you are, to glorify you. And so, Lord, I lift up all the parents out there who are listening right now. And I pray, Father, that you will give them courage and bravery and a decision to say the hard things, to have the difficult conversations, help them to know when and how and what words to use. Father, I thank you for Britt and his heart for you. And I pray that you will continue to bless him and his audience as you use him for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks so much.